Welcome to the Huggadrum podcast, a life with drums and drumming. I am your host, Angus McCurrach, and you're very welcome. And now, let the drumming begin. Yes, it's the Huggadrum podcast, your rhythmic respite from reality. Fun with drums, including
Drumming joke of the week.
The anagram, Drumagram.
and drums for life, well-being and drumming.
And now, here is your host from the Shedio. It's himself.
Yes, it's myself, and welcome to episode 4 of the Huggadrum Huggcast. You're all very welcome. If you've not listened to a Huggcast before, as always, you're in for a treat. This will be an experience that you will remember for the rest of the day, probably. In this week's Huggcast, we have a whole variety of things. We have the drummer's joke of the week that tells the story of Stanley, the drumming pig. And we've also got some more tips about how to deal with your stress. So look out for that. It's been an interesting week here in the UK. Up in Scotland, some of the lockdown measures have been loosened up a bit, so we're able to go and visit more places, see more people. And yesterday I had a visit, a surprise visit from a very good friend of mine, Scott Baxter. Scott Baxter plays with me in a band called The Tribe, and there's a bit more of them later in this episode. Scott has worms. Yeah, Scott breeds worms. He has a wormery. Now, why would you want to breed worms? Well, obviously fishermen would use worms, and sometimes they'll buy them from Scott. But worms are essential for healthy and nutrient soil. Keep the soil nutritious and aerated. Good for the crops, good for the garden, good for ecology. And Scott has a business selling worms. If you're interested, I'll put the details up here and you can contact him directly. But, as usual, there is a tenuous link between worms and drumming, and it's this: worm drumming. No, not quite as you might imagine. Quite difficult for a worm to drum on a drum, although you never know. I mean, they used to have, what were they called again? Flea circuses. If you could train a flea to use a trapeze, perhaps you could train a worm to play a paradiddle. Anyone out there who's looking for any ideas for some research, for a PhD, maybe, you can have that one for nothing. Anyway, worms and drumming. It turns out that one of the most effective way to get your worms out of the ground is to simulate rain. So worms like rain, and when they feel the raindrops pitter-pattering on the soil, it brings them to the top, and they come into the surface of the soil. So, apparently, if you use a certain gadget, you can induce the worms to come up to the top. Now, I'm going to demonstrate using a notepad. This particular notepad is of the kind where you have the rings holding the paper together. And this just shows you what you can do with things that are lying around. Listen to this. You have that Latin rhythm coming off your notepad. Anyway, forgive the singing, but that was just to demonstrate that what you can do with a pencil and a notepad. You get that type rhythm that you would get in Latin American music. Now, normally, and I'm sure you've either heard or seen this being done, that's done using a piece of wood that's got notches cut into it, and you stroke along the length of the piece of wood with another drumstick or something that produces that type of noise. Well, imagine if you put the end of such a piece of wood into the ground and played the rhythm along the stick. Well, that is exactly what worm charmers do. Yes, that's what they're called, worm charmers. They do that and the worms come to the surface. Now, isn't that amazing? And isn't it incredible how no matter what area of life, topics, different things that people do, different professions, different hobbies, different skills that people have, there's always a connection to drumming. But anyway, let's get on with this show. I'd like to talk to you about rope. Drummer's rope, to be specific. Now, many of you who play Irish baran, African djembe, congas, bongos, other percussion, such as the cajon, may not have heard of the drummer's rope, and that's understandable. The drummer's rope would not necessarily play a part in your perspective on drumming life. Now, I'm not talking about rope that might be used in some drums, like my Pictish drums, where the heads of the drums, that's the skins on either side of the drum, are tensioned with rope. That's a different kind of rope. That's tensioning the rope. I'm talking about drummer's rope. So, let's have a look at the mechanics of playing a drum kit. Your typical drum kit that, rock drummer might play, jazz drummers might play, your bass drum, maybe tom-toms on top, snare drum, floor tom, cymbals, hi-hat, bass pedal, the setup. Ringo Starr. Think of Ringo behind his drums. Or Phil Collins. They're all playing drum kits. Now, the thing is, if you think about it, you're sitting on a stool or a throne. Now that's an interesting concept. Drummer stools, that's what they used to be called when I first started playing drums. And then all of a sudden, they put a little back on the stool, not a back like in a chair, but just a little ridge that came up at the back to support your lower back, and probably a good thing, maybe made ergonomic sense, a bit more support to the drummer's back. But it suddenly became called the throne, the drummer's throne, which to me is a big kind of chair embossed with gold and maybe inlaid with tapestry, and you can kind of picture the king or a queen sitting on it. It look a bit silly actually in the front or behind the drum kit. I suppose unless you're playing in Spinal Tap or something like that. No, they basically rebranded the stool as the drummer's throne. Interesting to think about renaming things like that. You know, the whole discourse of language is actually quite fascinating. You know, in the same way as what used to be known in Britain as the Department of War became Department of Defence. So the emphasis is taken away from fighting and being aggressive and actively being engaged in confrontation to, well, no, we've got all this stuff because we're trying to defend ourselves. You know, a more passive stance. So, Ministry of Defence. Anyway, stools became thrones. So the discourse changed, the narrative changed. And probably quite a positive thing. Maybe drummers deserve to be sitting on something more comfortable and more ergonomically designed. Anyway, you're sitting on your throne, and in front of you is the bass drum. And attached to the rim of the bass drum, at the bottom, is the drum pedal. So the drum pedal is that pedal which, if you push it down, it brings the beater forward and it hits the bass drum. So when a kit drummer hits the drum pedal, it then goes boom on the bass drum. That's how it works. However, what is it they say? Every cause has an opposite and equal effect. In other words, when you push down on the pedal, it propels the beater forward with a force that hits the drum and causes it to make a noise. However, there's also a kinetic energy involved in this, in that the tendency is that you're also pushing slightly forward. So, if you could imagine you had your bass drum sitting on a pair of roller skates and you hit the bass pedal, the drum is going to slide away because you've applied a force to the side of the drum and it's on the skates and off it goes. So, to overcome this force, at the front of a bass drum, you will see what's called the spurs. So they're at the front and they're in the bottom third of the drum on the outside, and they're sticking out like a bit like stabilisers on a bike. So if you're teaching your children to ride a bike, you might start off with stabilisers, these additional wheels that come out at an angle from the back of the bike. So just imagine those coming out of the front of a bass drum. And what happens is these little legs, they come down and they touch the ground, and they're angled in such a way as they resist any attempt to move the drum forward. That is the theory. So if you're kicking down on the pedal, the bass drum stays where it is. It's anchored. It's anchored, that's a good word. The anchoring of the bass drum by the legs, actually called spurs, presumably from the horse racing fraternity. These spurs prevent the drum from moving forward. That is the theory. And if your drum is sitting on a nice little carpet, something that's got quite a rough surface, then the spurs, which typically have interchangeable ends, so you could have a spike sticking out which would dig into the carpet. That's what stops the drum from moving forward. You can also have a rubber end on the spur, which means if you're playing on a wooden floor, for example, that the rubber tends to stop the drum moving forward, but in my experience it doesn't, and this is where the drummer's rope comes in. I have over the years played a number of gigs where over the course of an evening, because of the surface of the particular floor upon which I am playing the drums, the bass drum starts to move forward. And you're sitting on your stool or throne, which doesn't move forward. So as you can imagine, as the drum moves further away, it takes the pedal which is attached to it also further away, and you find yourself extending your leg more and more and more until you're kind of sliding off the drum stool in the attempt to keep hitting the bass drum. Meanwhile, also having to play the hi-hat, the snare, the tom-toms for any fills, hitting the cymbals. It's a nightmare, an absolute nightmare, and I still have dreams. They're not quite nightmares, they're not horrific, but they are dreams of me playing with a band and the drum is moving slowly away. It's usually a gig where there's high stakes. You know, if you perform well, we're going to become mega rich rock stars or something. And of course, my drum takes all that away as it slides off into the sunset. Gareth Jones, who I talked about in a previous podcast, bass player in the Blue Hyenas, he used to recognise this. He would turn round and see me beginning to struggle, and Gareth would very subtly make his way to the front of my bass drum and using his arse would actually attempt to push the bass drum back into place. That helped for a moment or two, and then we were back to square one. My solution to this over the years was always to have a length of rope in with my gear, a length of rope in with all my other gear. This meant that I could tie the rope to my drum stool and then round the front of the bass drum and back to the drum stool, so that everything was anchored, and that is the drummer's rope. I guess that's just to highlight that these are the sorts of things that happen to drummers. That there's a machine involved, the drum pedal, also the hi-hat, that's also a machine going up and down, and like all machines, they need to be treated with care and respect, possibly lubricated, but given the tender, loving care that most machines need. And the drummer's rope, I guess, is just an example of how pragmatic you have to be sometimes when things don't quite go right.
For the benefit of you all, you will of course understand I undertake extensive research for these Huggcasts. And upon doing so for this particular item, I have found that the drummer's rope has become a strap. Yes, you can now buy the drummer's strap, which does exactly what I have described the rope does. This is one of these occasions when you think, I should have patented the drummer's rope. I could be making a fortune if I'd only come up with the drummer's strap. But congratulations to those who did. Great solution for a worldwide problem.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour of the Gigging Drummers drum kit. Always have your rope handy, that would be the takeaway from that one. Now, it's time for...
Drumming joke of the week.
This week's drummer's joke takes place in the quaint Yorkshire village of Driffield. Driffield is a fantastic place, and every year they have the Driffield Music Festival. I play in a band called The Tribe. Pictish, postmodern, punktish musical extravaganza. We are three. We are bagpipes and guitar and Pictish drums. And there is no beginning to our talent. We are well known throughout Scotland and beyond. England, Spain, Africa. Yes, we are an international band. And every year for the past 5 or 6 years, we have been invited to the Driffield Music Festival, and we have many friends down there. One year we were down there and we had just finished a sound check, which usually consists of trying to get the drums and the guitar as loud as the bagpipes. So that took us a wee while. But then afterwards I went for a wee walk, and I'm walking through Driffield. It's a beautiful sunny day. There's butterflies flying around. There's beautiful flowers in the flower baskets, and just a very picturesque Yorkshire village. And I'm walking past the cheese shop. Now, the cheese shop, as you can imagine, has got a window full of all sorts of fascinating and extravagant cheeses from around the world. But Driffield Cheesemonger also makes the world famous Driffield cheddar. Anyway, I'm walking past the cheese shop and I can hear in the distance the sound of somebody playing an African djembe drum. Not the sort of thing you expect to hear in Driffield. Having said that, neither are Pictish drums. Driffield is the place where you will find Morris dancers. Yeah, Morris dancers dancing around, hitting poles against each other. In fact, one year, certain members of the tribe took part. It was kind of Pictish Highlanders versus Morris dancers, and I can tell you, they do not hold back with their big heavy staffs or sticks. It was quite a frightening experience. Anyway, I am walking past the cheese shop. I hear the sound of the African djembe. And I thought, what's this? What's this incredible noise? So, there was a little alleyway going up the side of the cheese shop, and I suspected that this alleyway led to the back where there was the cheese factory, where they made their cheese. So I walked up this alleyway, and I was correct. The djembe got louder. I knew I was heading in the right direction. As I got to the back of the cheese shop, there was a white picket fence on my right hand side. Beautiful white picket fence, and there was poppies sticking their head through the gaps, there was daisies, butterflies and bumblebees buzzing around. It was fantastic. Beautiful sight. And I knew right away this is where the noise of the djembe was coming from. So I leaned over the picket fence and I was amazed. I can't tell you, I cannot describe how amazed I was. My amazement was on the 9.9 on the amazement scale. That's out of 10. I was on the brink of astoundment, sitting at a table with the djembe between its legs was a pig. Yes, a pig. So the pig was sitting on a wooden stool. Its hind legs were on the ground with the djembe between, and it was playing the djembe with its front legs, its trotters. It was an incredible sight. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things, hallucinating. Had I stepped into an alternative world? I kind of looked around to see if I could find Alice in Wonderland, but no, it was the pig. He was real, playing the djembe. And it was pretty good djembe playing as well, I can tell you. The sound of trotter hitting drumskin was magnificent. And what's more, when I looked up, the pig was wearing a green velvet waistcoat. A green velvet waistcoat. And in the top left lapel of the waistcoat, there was a tulip. Beautiful yellow tulip stuck in to the lapel of the waistcoat. And on the other side of the waistcoat, and bemused I was, medals. The pig had 3 gold medals pinned to the other side of its waistcoat. What a sight this was, and what a sound. A pig with medals, wearing a tulip in its waistcoat, was playing an African djembe. I was struck dumb. Then I began to wonder, okay, this is real, this is reality, this is not a dream. I tugged my beard. Now, as someone who has studied psychology and sleep health, I can tell you that there are some things that you can do to tell whether you are dreaming or not. And one is the tugging of the beard technique. This was discovered by that well-known psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, who always had a beard for that specific reason. So if you're dreaming and you're not sure whether it's reality or a dream, tug your beard. If you can feel the tug, then it's not a dream, you're in the real world. Interestingly enough, it's the same if you come across a mirror in a dream. If you look into the mirror and you can see your face, then you are not dreaming. Now the reason for that is that when you're dreaming, your brain obviously has to create all of the images and sounds and things that you see in your dream. That's quite complicated. That involves a lot of processing. So, if you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you see your face that probably means you're not dreaming because your brain does not have the capacity to create that image. Anyway, back to the pig with the waistcoat, the tulip and the medals. I'm just standing there pondering, having established that this is reality, and I hear a sound. There's someone coming out the back door of the cheese shop. It's the cheesemonger, and he's carrying a tray of cheese. And he's coming out to tell the pig, well, what he said was, "Can you keep the noise down a bit? You're disturbing the cheeses." Which I thought was an interesting observation in itself, that noise could disturb cheese. But he was the cheesemonger. But then an awful thing befell. He slipped on some curds that had dripped onto the concrete behind the cheesemonger back door. He went flying. The tray of cheeses went flying. And it was only then I knew what kind of cheese he had been processing, because there was debris everywhere. Well, he picked himself up, dusted himself down, and he was fine. There was no problem. And he cursed and sweared a bit, but he was okay. And then he noticed me. He said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't know there was someone there. Excuse me, I'm just fallen over." And I said, yeah, I saw it all. Don't worry. Are you okay? And he said, yes, he's fine. I said, I'd just come round the corner because I heard the sound of the djembe. I was shocked and stunned to discover that it's a pig playing the djembe. Ah, yes, our wonderful pig, Stanley. Yes, Stanley's a real member of the family. Magnificent member of the family. We're so proud of Stanley. And it was then I noticed that Stanley had a wooden leg. This pig, with the djembe between its legs, one of the legs was wooden. They were on the far side. That's why I hadn't noticed it before. I was stumped. I didn't know what to think. We've got a pig here, Stanley, wearing a green velvet waistcoat, tulip in the lapel, medals pinned to the other side of the waistcoat, and he has a wooden leg, and he is playing the djembe like I've never heard before. This required further investigation. So I said, I can see that Stanley is quite a talented pig. But where did he get the medals? Ah, yes. Well, these are medals for bravery. I said, oh, what did Stanley do? Well, the first medal, the one on the left-hand side, that happened several years ago. My wife was in the cheese factory, and she was just turning some of the big, huge parmesans that we produce here. They are gigantic, and my wife is quite petite. She's very small. But she is able just about to turn these big, huge parmesans. And there was a calamity. There was a cheesy calamity. Her hand slipped and her foot slipped, and she ended up being pinned to the floor of the cheese factory by a gigantic piece of parmesan, a huge round parmesan, and she was struggling to breathe. She could have died there. But Stanley, he came running in from outside. He'd heard the noise and heard her screaming, and Stanley came in, and with his snout he managed to push the parmesan off of my wife, and she was saved. She owes her life to Stanley. It got in the local newspapers, and the mayor of Driffield got to hear about it, and Stanley was awarded a medal for bravery. Magnificent Stanley. I said, that is incredible. And how is your wife? Oh, she's fine. She fully recovered. I said, but what about the next medal? Well, he says, a couple of years later, we had flooding in Driffield. We had non-stop rain for days. Nothing but rain, thunder, wind, and the river burst its banks and we were flooded. So my son, he was 12 at the time, and he was out playing in the puddles. But you couldn't tell how deep the puddles were, and he fell in to a big, deep hole that had been left there by the council before the rain came, and he was drowning. His little hands were flapping around, he couldn't get himself out of the hole, and he was screaming. And again, Stanley heard the noise. Stanley rushed over, and with his two front trotters, he managed to grab hold of my son and pull him out of the hole and save him. He saved him from a certain death. Magnificent Stanley the pig. Again, the story got into the local newspaper, and the mayor said we need to give Stanley another medal. Stanley got his second award for bravery, and he very much became part of our family. Oh, that's incredible. What about the third medal? Why did Stanley get the third medal? Well, by this time you're probably thinking we're quite an unlucky family. But to be fair, the third episode didn't really involve members of the family. What happened was, outside the cheese shop is the bus stop. And this is where, every morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, the school bus comes to collect the school children. And they all queue outside the cheese shop and they wait to get on the bus, and then they're taken to school. This particular morning, the bus driver, once all the kids were on the bus, decided he needed to go for a piece of cheese. So he went round the back, knocked on the factory door to see if he could get some cheese. Meanwhile, on the bus, one of the kids had been messing around in the driver's seat and accidentally knocked off the handbrake. Well, this bus, which was on a hill, started to go backwards. It was rolling backwards down the big steep brae behind Driffield, heading in to the river. A school bus filled with 20 young children heading backwards into the river. And there was screams. They were screaming and screaming and screaming. And the bus driver heard this and rushed out and started to run after the bus, but he couldn't reach it. Then suddenly, from behind him, there was a whoosh of pink. It was Stanley. Stanley was galloping to the bus. Stanley managed to get on the bus, and with his teeth, he pulled the handbrake on. He saved 25 children that day. And the bus was saved as well. Stanley was on the television, he was on the radio, he was in the newspapers, he became a national sensation. Stanley got his third medal for saving those children. He is a magnificent, magnificent animal. And as a reward, he was presented with a djembe drum. A djembe drum. Stanley had always been very rhythmical. Sometimes in a summer afternoon you would hear him playing away on some stones or finding a piece of wood and just rat-a-tat-tatting on the wood. So we knew that he liked drumming. So we got him an African djembe. A very special African djembe because it had been seen. His story had been seen by the President of South Africa. Nelson Mandela, who was the president at the time, had seen Stanley receiving his award on television, and he made the decision that Stanley should be gifted not only the djembe, but the freedom of Cape Town. So anytime Stanley is in South Africa, he has the freedom of Cape Town. World famous pig. I said, this is incredible. Here I am in Druffield for a gig with my band for the music festival. I'm going for a walk, a wander round the corner. I come across the most incredible animal I've ever seen playing the djembe. He's got his little waistcoat on, nice little tulip, and he's got these medals for bravery. That is so incredible. But tell me, I said, why does he have a wooden leg? Oh, says the cheesemonger, with an animal so talented, you wouldn't want to eat him all at once.
Drumming joke of the week.
Well, I hope you'll agree that joke was up to the extremely high standard of all the other jokes, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, just thinking about what we were talking about earlier on with the drummer's rope, one of the other things that I have encountered over the years is the various types of handedness that drummers have. Handedness. So you get left-handed drummers playing a right-handed drum kit. Ringo was an example of that, and many of his drum fills sound so different because it's a right-handed drummer playing a left-handed drum kit. No, it's not. It's a left-handed drummer playing a right-handed drum kit. You see how confusing it gets? So let's just be clear about this. Ringo Starr, who was born as Richard Starkey in 1940, is left-handed, but he learned to play a right-handed drum kit. Now, that means that when he's performing certain functions around the drum kit, he's leading with his right hand, which is not his main hand of choice. So things came out differently, and that's partly why some of Ringo's fills and what he played on the drums is actually quite unusual and innovative. Easy for me to say. Anyway, here's a little film about something that I discovered regarding left-handed wooden spoons.
Yeah, I was quite sceptical at first because, you would think that a wooden spoon was kind of a universal implement that could be used by someone who was either right-handed or left-handed. But my wife is left-handed, and she was always saying, this doesn't feel right, it doesn't do the job. She's from a part of the world where people used to make their own wooden implements. She's from deep in the dark forest in Germany, where they would make their own tools and her entire family, going back generations, have been left-handed. And when I had a look, and it's very subtle differences, it's the tapering of the edge of the spoon part, the bowl part of the spoon, that seems to, well, at first it seemed to, I now know it's been confirmed by Strathclyde College University, that the tapering of the spoon at the edge means that when using it left-handed, it's 60% more efficient. So I first of all started off by building or creating spoons just for my family's use, my wife and her mother to use. They're both left-handed. But we had so many inquiries coming in. We're now producing 6.3, let's get this right, 6.3 million? 6.3 million wooden spoons every 6 months from Whinnyfold in Aberdeenshire. And it is causing a stir.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little piece of public information about left-handed spoons. And now it's time for this week's Drumagram. So last week's Drumagram was mix turds, which of course is an anagram version of drumsticks. This week's anagram is, oh, I'm so excited about this one, because sometimes when you try to work out an anagram, you come out with things that are a bit convoluted, you kind of got words that don't really go together. This week's Drumagram, and remember, it's got something to do with drums and drumming, is supersonic. Yep, supersonic. So if you can work out what supersonic is as an anagram of something related to drums and drumming, send me an email to Huggcast@Huggadrum.com, and if you're in there and you've got the correct answer, you could win a prize. But that's us for this week. Thank you so much for listening or watching. And remember, please subscribe on YouTube and subscribe to whatever podcast platform you use, and that way you won't miss any of these amazing episodes of the Huggcast. But till the next episode, bye. The Huggadrum podcast is a co-production between Huggadrum.com, Huggadrumshop.com and Handpicked Drums. It's a collaboration with Buchan Council.